Thank you for joining us today to learn more about research presentations at conferences. Today, we'll share with you some tips and tricks, as well as information on how to deliver an efficient presentation, objective and powerful podium presentation, and how to stand out when also giving a poster presentation at a conference. Regardless if you're a first-time presenter or if you have already given multiple presentations before, we are sure you will find this webinar very useful. Today's Hangout is organized by the Membership Committee of the Resident and Fellow Associate Society of ACS. Membership in RAS is automatic when you become a resident member or an associate fellow. Being a part of RAS comes with many benefits, from access to JACS, our newsletter, our website, educational materials, ACS-sponsored benefit programs, and also being eligible to apply to prestigious awards and scholarships. So make sure you take advantage of your RAS benefits going forward and reach out to any one of us from RAS if there's anything we can help you with or any material you need access to. My name is Camila Getter, and I'm a general surgery resident at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, and I'm the current chair of the membership committee of RAS. And I have the privilege today of having here in this webinar some very experienced leaders in academic surgery to share their thoughts and their advice on this topic. So first, we have Dr. Ali Tavakoli. He's the chief of the Division of General and GI Surgery at Brigham and Women's Hospital, as well as the co-director for the Center of Weight Management and Wellness, and the program director of the Advanced Minimally Invasive Fellowship at Brigham and Women's Hospital. He's also currently serving as the chair of the Scientific Forum for ACS. So thank you so much for being here, Dr. Tavakoli. And we also have Dr. Brooke Bredbeck, and she's a general surgeon at Cornwall Health Lakeland Hospitals. She's the RAS representative for the 2024 ACS Conference Program Committee. So she will be able to share a little bit with us about that too. Thank you for being here with us, Dr. Bredbeck. And before we get started with our kind of questions and answers, we're going to have Dr. Tavakoli share with us some information about the Scientific Forum, which he is leading and has information to share with us for us to understand a little bit about the behind the scenes and how things work during the clinical congress.
So thank you again for inviting me, and great to have this opportunity to present a little bit of data about the Scientific Forum Committee. For many who have been to the clinical congress and those who are coming, there's kind of two parts to the clinical congress meeting. One is the clinical presentations, and the other part is where current research and presentations are made. So that session, the sessions which are focused on new scientific data presentations, new research presentations by the residents and the medical students, is referred to as the Scientific Forum. And that section is managed by the Scientific Forum Committee. So I'm chair of that committee, and I wanted to start by giving you a little bit of a background to the Scientific Forum. This committee is actually officially called the Owen Wangenstein Scientific Forum Committee. The name is dedicated to Dr. Owen Wangenstein, who was a medical student and the MD, and eventually chair of surgery in Minnesota. He is credited with inventing the nasogastric tube. But more importantly, he was one of the leaders who, at the time, who recognized the importance of scientific research in advancing our field, and he incorporated mandatory research training into his surgical training at the time. Starting in 1947 and approved by Dr. Wangenstein and the ACS Board of Regents at the time, the Forum on Fundamentals of Surgical Problems was officially created. This was the official name of these sessions, which subsequently was renamed Scientific Forum. And the goal was to provide young surgical groups a forum for presentations of results of original and experimental research. And this forum has evolved, but has really continued to be an important part of the clinical congress every year. And it presents and provides an opportunity for surgical trainees to provide their work. I personally myself first presented at this meeting over 20 years ago. The committee now consists of 32 members that represent a diverse group of specialties, and many of these people act as team leaders in 27 categories of specialties in which we receive abstracts. This is the idea that the American College of Surgeons and the Clinical Congress really represents the house of surgery. This list here identifies the 27 categories in which people can submit abstracts to for the Clinical Congress, and covers everything from what we regard as general surgery to ethics to subspecialties such as thoracic surgery and urology and orthopedics and neurosurgery. Other than, and as part of the scientific kind of forum committee, our role is to go through these submitted abstracts, select the best, and essentially divide these presentations into 76 scientific forum sessions, which take place during the Clinical Congress. We also have a very active and busy e-poster sessions in 37 in total, which includes the sessions on posters of exceptional merit. We also go through, as we go through these abstracts, we also identify 24 submissions, which we as the forum committee feel represent the best research that year. And these 24 abstracts receive an Excellence in Research Award. There is some monetary award, but really most of all is the prestige. And then furthermore, the top 100 or so of these abstracts also get invited to submit a paper to JACS, which undergoes an expedited review. So these are the advantages you receive. The Scientific Forum also does several other things, including we host special sessions during the Clinical Congress. One of them is the High Impact Clinical Trials and Studies, or the HIT session. The other one is the Seminal Works in Surgery. And then we every year, the Scientific Forum is dedicated to an outstanding surgical scientist who really represents the values of Dr. Weinstein from several decades ago. And the Scientific Forum Committee is assigned with choosing that dedicatee. And another role we have is really we propose panel sessions for the Clinical Congress to keep the kind of research theme active during the Clinical Congress every year. I'm going to focus mostly my presentations is really focusing on how we select abstracts for the presentations. So this is data over the last several years on how many abstracts the Clinical Congress receives every year. As you can see, for the upcoming meeting in San Francisco, we had about 2,400 abstracts. So we receive a large number. That, as you can see, during the COVID, there was a slight decrease, but usually we're in the over 22,000 abstract submissions. Majority of the abstracts we receive are submitted by residents and students and fellows. So about 80% of the submissions are from trainees, which highlights what the Clinical Congress and the Scientific Forum is really all about. Getting young researchers involved in the meeting, present their best work. The process of reviewing these submissions is very complex, but it's made easy because we have an outstanding group of reviewers. So every year, the submission deadline for the Clinical Congress and the Scientific Forum is March 1. You can put this on your calendar for the next few decades, hopefully. And as I mentioned, we normally get about 22,400 abstracts. Our goal is to make sure that every abstract gets 3 independent reviews. So, we get a fair assessment of the abstracts. As I mentioned, we have 26 team leaders that are kind of leading this effort, but they in turn rely on ad hoc reviewers who they invite. And last year, we had a group of about 170 ad hoc reviewers. So this is a big group of people. We make sure that no ad hoc reviewer gets more than 60 abstracts so they don't get overworked. And we have a quick turnaround by March 25th so that we can start finalizing the program and sending announcements out. Despite the large number, I'm happy to report that all abstracts usually are reviewed within 48 hours of deadline, which is a really quite a remarkable achievement. And I want to just take this opportunity to thank any ad hoc reviewers who are listening and also the team leaders. This is what the data looks like in terms of overall acceptance. So as you can see here, when focusing on this upcoming meeting, we had about the overall acceptance rate was around 56%. As you can see, depending on the number of submissions we've received each year, that number varies a little bit, but it's around, for this year, is around 56%. About 22% of the abstracts we receive are international. So it just shows that this is an international meeting and not just about the US participation. Of the abstract that are presented, about 800 are oral presentations, and the oral presentations in turn fall into full-length oral presentations, which are 8-minute presentations with 3 minutes question and answer time, and then quick shots, which are 3-minute presentations with 2 minutes of question and answer time. And then about 550 are e-poster presentations. I do want to talk about e-posters a bit, because this is a concept that was introduced to the Scientific Forum and the Clinical Congress about 6 or 7 years ago. It has been really great and very engaging. These are the number of people that have that attended each of the e-poster sessions last year in 2023. As you can see, 200 to 300 people turn up. The room, for those who have attended, the rooms you can see are busy, very kind of closed discussions, and I encourage anyone listening to at least, so if you're not presenting, please come and experience the sessions. They're really wonderful. I think that finishes my overview of the Scientific Forum, and Camilla, happy for you to take the lead and let us know what we need to answer.
That was such an interesting introduction to the Scientific Forum. Lots of information I didn't know about. It's so crazy to see how quick that turnover is, and to imagine how much work actually happens behind the scenes to make it all happen. So thank you to you and to your committee for making that happen. And as you can all see, trainees do have a very important role in the Scientific Forum as being the majority of authors that are sending their abstracts to be reviewed. So we'll now go over the main questions that you all may have about presenting, and this will apply to presenting at the upcoming clinical congress if you did have an abstract that was accepted, or at other conferences you may have in the future as well. So to start, for our medical students and first-time presenters, would you mind describing a little bit about the differences between these different format of presentations that you mentioned? So what is a poster, an e-poster, or a quick shot presentation, podium presentations, either Dr. Bredbeck or Dr. Tavakoli?
So Dr. Tavakoli kind of already addressed some of the differences between them. So I thought I could use this as an opportunity to talk about differences in your presenting style based on them. So when we're talking about a podium presentation, that's either going to be a quick shot or just a regular podium presentation. You're going to be up at an actual podium, and you're going to have the slide behind you, and you're going to be presenting to a huge room of an audience. More often than not, that room will not be full of people. It will have like a third the number of people that can actually fit in there, and that can get really intimidating. So one of my recommendations is, if you have friends that you know are coming, if you're giving a podium or a quick shot, tell them to come and tell them to sit in the front seats, because it can be much more awkward when you're a presenter, when you're trying to find people to make eye contact with and they're all the way at the back of the room. And likewise, be that person. If you're going and you're supporting one of your friends who's giving a podium presentation or something like that, go to the front, sit in the front, be that person that can, their comfort person who they can look at and actually maintain eye contact with to make it more comfortable for them to give that presentation. Also, you don't want to be looking behind you too much when you're giving those podiums and those oral like quick shots. So make sure that you know your slides really, really well, and maybe know where to point to places if there is something that you ever want to emphasize. Otherwise, not too much else to know for that. And then for posters, I would say the big thing is, if you saw in Dr. Tavakoli's picture, there were like 20 people crowded around a little screen that has the poster on it. And that is one cluster of people, but right next door is another cluster of people, and next door is another cluster of people. So it feels like a chaotic marketplace, and it's really wonderful and lovely. But one thing to keep in mind is, if you're a naturally quiet or introverted person, you have to speak up when you're doing the poster presentations, because you can get drowned out very easily from the people that are next door to you or from people having side conversations. So be prepared prepared to project your voice a lot more whenever you're doing poster presentations, e-posters at Clinical Congress.
Yeah, no, I think that was excellent points by Dr. Bradbeck. I think to adding a few points about the oral presentations, which can be full oral presentations or quick shots, and I think the length of time you're assigned for these differs based in different societies. As I mentioned at the Clinical Congress, you have 8 minutes for a full length oral presentations, 3 minutes for a quick shot. But otherwise, you go on a podium, as we heard the slides are behind you. And it can be quite daunting when you get to this room. They're not always full. We try to get them full as much as possible. But the reality is you may go into this room and you may see a subject matter expert who you have read all their work is sitting right in front of you. And as you present, they may be making faces, they may be doing something, and it can be really daunting. I think the key to it, kind of get over this, is to practice a lot. So I think practicing before presentations is really important. If it's your first time presenting, I really, really encourage people to go to the room beforehand, go on the podium beforehand, look at the room beforehand to get a sense of what it all looks like, where are the lights and everything else. Make sure the pointers work. So if you want to point to a specific data point, it works. And also get familiar that although the slides are behind you, you have a little tiny screen behind you, in front of you. There's often a bigger TV screen on the floor that shows what actual view of the slide is and what other people are saying. And it's good to get used to that part of it. I think that when it comes to poster presentations, I think, poster presentations can take a place of a paper poster that goes on a wall and you kind of go and work through the data points. I think increasingly societies are using less of those and relying on e-posters, which are where you have an electronic poster that's displayed on a TV. So it spares you the cost of printing a poster. Many of you probably have never printed a poster before, but for some of us who lived in that era, it's a bit of a hassle, it's a bit of an expense. And then you have to carry this paper poster there. You have to remember to take it down. You have to remember to bring it back. But so the e-posters are much better and certainly what most people do. For the college, for the Clinical Congress, there are e-poster presentations. You can do two options. You can actually create what looks like a paper poster and just display that on the screen and go through the data points. We also encourage people to use a three-slide format for presenting your posters, which is kind of an introduction, a method, and results with some important conclusions you can highlight. And I think societies have different rules on that issue as well.
Yeah, these are all great and very kind of practical pieces of advice, which are definitely very helpful as someone that has already presented. Now thinking back, like I wish I was up on that podium a little bit before just to see where people were sitting. I wish I had my friends sitting in that front row, so I was not kind of looking around and trying to find them. For first-time presenters too, what about kind of formatting your slides or your poster design? Any major pieces of advice or pitfalls or things people should avoid in terms of font size or colors or how to format things? Because you definitely want to keep people engaged, but how do you do that in a way that it's also not overwhelming?
Yeah, so I think if you are a medical student or a resident presenting original research, my hope is that you know your data backwards and forwards. And the blessing of that is if anyone asks you a question, you can pull out of your back pocket, I know exactly how we did this analysis. I know exactly how we abstracted these data. But you can also get lost in the weeds a little bit if you know your data too well. So I think a lot of people have good resources. Like I know Dr. Andrew Ibrahim from University of Michigan has some nice YouTube videos that I would welcome anyone to check out that go a little bit more step by step in how to create a poster presentation or how to design an oral presentation. But I think some of the big highlights of these are to know your material really well, but to understand that your project is an iceberg. And what you're going to present is just the tip of that iceberg. And you need to start with your so what statement, or at least that's what we called it when I was in English class. Why did you do this study in the first place? What's the importance or significance of this study? And what were the results of that? So that can be part of your title. And everything should always point back to your so what statement. What is the reason that we did this study? So I should have thought of an example before we started this. I'm trying to think of one off the fly. But you want to make sure that you're always pointing to that as you go through. And you want it to be a simple, tightly crafted narrative. Again, I know there's going to be a lot of nuance. I know there are going to be all these things that are exceptions or these additional tidbits that you found in your subgroup analysis afterwards. But you really want to have one major message for this study. And that'll allow you to keep your data a little bit simpler because you don't want to have too many words on your slide. It'll allow you to keep your visuals a little bit simpler. And I mean that when I'm talking about results tables, things like that, but also your icons. You want those to be nice and simple and easy for people to see and pick out on the slide. And then when you have your conclusion, it can just be, XYZ led to this. And of course, then people are going to come up, all those experts are going to come up afterwards during the Q&A, and they're going to pick apart your data and you'll be able to answer all those questions. But those shouldn't come up necessarily when you're giving your initial presentation.
No, I don't have much to add. I think that was a beautiful summary. I think in terms of, you ask about kind of slide formats and stuff. So I think, there are 1,000,001 ways recommendations, and I think everyone's PI and supervisor will have some input into it. I think my 2 cents is that whatever you choose, whether it's a dark background with light text, or light background with dark text, or colors or no colors, and animation and no animations, I think it's good to remain consistent during the presentation and your slides. Make sure your font sizes and font formats and font colors are all the same. The slides are not too busy. And I think it's also important to realize who your audience is and how you set up your slides, that there will be some people who are the world's experts on that topic in that room. And there will also be people who know nothing about what you're talking about. And I think thinking about how you set up your presentation and your slides to keep them engaged, how much background do you give without making it too boring versus relevant to everyone, is an art, and that will come with practice and mentorship. But I think those would be my advice.
No, those are definitely great. And I think one thing that helped me a lot in kind of tackling all those little things is by really pretending one day as if you are in the conference and getting a group of friends, getting a group of attendings that are part of your lab or fellows, whoever you're working with, and presenting, because then you are also going to have those questions that come at the end, and you can try to envision a little bit what people may be asking you. And when it comes to questions, I'm wondering if either of you have any tips or advices on how to practice for them, or other tips, because it is kind of hard to, try to think about what people are going to ask, and then also find a way of answering them in a way that you can kind of remember all of that data, all of those things you were talking about before, and especially if they're hard questions. So any advice on that?
I think similar to what we were talking about before, practicing is really helpful. If you practice around smart people who know the topic quite well, ask them to pick apart your presentation as much as possible. And they will come up with holes that they can poke into it. And then you'll be able to go back, look at those data again, figure out why that limitation isn't really significant or whatever, and then you'll be able to present yourself very well. Or they might come up with a new area for you to look into that you hadn't even thought of, and now you have a great, next step to talk about when you're giving your presentation as well. But I think to whatever extent you can find anyone who is knowledgeable about your topic, I would probably present what you can about your planned presentation when it's still very much in the brainstorming stage to someone, even if it's just your PI. And then you should have at least 2 additional presentations after that are a truly crafted slideshow. The one is the slideshow that you think is perfect, and then that'll get picked apart. And then you should present the one post being picked apart that is now going to be the one that you're actually going to present, and just make sure that everything's nice and polished by the time you present it that second time.
I think how to address questions and run a good Q&A session is really important. And to me, that's the most important part and really useful and helpful part of that. So my recommendations is that when you go up there, to do your presentations, make sure you take a piece of paper and pen with you, because some of the people who ask questions, they ask one question and it's simple and you do it. But in the heat of the moment and you're nervous and someone asks about 2 or 3 parts to that question, you may forget. And you see people who go, I'm sorry, I forgot what your second question was and everything. And I think it's nice to avoid those scenarios. So I recommend taking a pen and paper, write whatever you get asked, and try to go through it systematically in terms of answering them. I think it's important to realize your research, it is not going to be, no research is perfect, and no research is going to answer every question that people are going to ask. So don't get offended if people are critical of your work. That it's fine, as long as it's fair. I think it's reasonable to accept limitations of your work. It is important to know the limitations of your work as well. So sometimes when people answer question answer, they try to they don't acknowledge some of the limitations. So I think knowing your work, knowing your data, knowing its limitations, knowing what else is out there in the literature is important. And I think as we talked about before, all of this, the more you practice before with your PI, with your friends, with your colleagues, I think the better. You're just going to look that part of the presentation to go smoother.
And one thing I did forget to bring up also is I think it helps as the presenter to repeat the question that you were asked. Often the people who are asking the question will be speaking into a microphone, but sometimes they will go on a little bit of like a rambling, spiel or something like that. And it helps the audience clarify what the question is so the audience can hear the question twice. And then it also helps you think through it. It gives you a little bit of time to think through it. You're like, okay, I think what you're asking is, this. And then if the person nods, then you're on the right track. But now the audience is totally primed and you've had a little bit of time to think through what your answer is going to be.
And if I can also just add as well, I think if you're a medical student presenting, I do recommend that before the presentation, you go to the moderators, introduce yourself, and maybe being acknowledged that you're a medical student presenting sometimes allows people to gauge the kind of questions they're going to ask. I think that I think ultimately that makes that exchange more helpful. So I think it's good to do that before.
People get really excited when medical students present. So if you are a medical student, please let people know because we'll be very happy for you and people will definitely go a little bit easier on you.
Yeah, and it's such if you haven't been to the clinical congress before, it's such a nice environment that you see people of all different types of areas, but also levels of training. So like Dr. Brett Beck said, everyone's so excited to see medical students or first-time presenters. Sometimes they even have the little ribbon that says first-time attendee or something that you can put in your little kind of like name tag. So definitely don't feel like by being your first time or presenting the first time that that's something bad or something that people will not like. People actually get very excited to see people that are new in training, getting new into research. So this is what the Congress is all about. So you definitely belong, even if it might be scary at first. And we are talking about kind of like rehearse. And it seems like that's kind of the key to things. And I definitely agree with that. What about if you're rehearsing and you're having difficulty with time management? Because sometimes you see some people presenting and they're either speaking too quickly or trying to cram too much in your slides, or in your kind of abstract presentation, poster presentation, or sometimes you see people going kind of under their allotted time. Any specific trips or tricks that you have about how to prepare exactly for time management, both before and how to kind of deal with it during the presentation itself?
I think just trying to distill whatever your project is, like challenge yourself to distill it into a single sentence. So in, health services research, it would be if we increase spending in, this division, readmissions went down or something like that. Obviously, there's going to be more nuance to it. If I, use a knockout mice in this experiment, something else happens. And if you can do that, if you're up for that challenge and you can create that tight narrative, then I think you'll always be able to have good time management with your presentation. And then again, you can go into those nuances when Q&A session starts. Or if you find that you actually have enough space now in your presentation to add some of that nuance in, then you can go back after the fact and do it.
I agree. I think, as we've said, timing starts with practice. So I think the more you practice in front of your colleagues and research fellows and other lab people beforehand, the better it is. And I think when it comes to those practices, if the choice becomes, do I speak faster and just squeeze in more data versus I speak at a normal speed and present less data? I personally would favor speak normal speed and put less data, because I think it needs to be coherent and people need to have to digest it. I also think, though, when despite presentation, you may be in your lab and give the best presentation ever, and then when you're up on that stage, things can start falling apart a little bit. You lose track. So I think if you kind of lose get disoriented a little bit, I think it's okay just to pause for a couple of seconds. It may seem to you you've paused for a few days, but it's really just a couple of seconds. Take a deep breath and just start it again. I also, for timekeeping, remember on the podium there's usually a little color-coded sort of method that keeps track of time. It's either a timer, and then when you get to the last minute, it goes red. So pay attention to that. Make sure you're familiar with that. I do think going over is not good. So I think that's why you should try. I mean, going over by a few seconds is fine, but over is not good. And it stresses not only you, but honestly, it stresses the moderators as well, because that's their job. And it's really tough for a moderator to cut off the presentation. So it just ruins the whole session. So I think it becomes important. The other thing I do, which may be a little bit too much, to be honest with you, but if for our fellows and students who are presenting the first time, I usually, or someone from our lab would sit in front. And if we feel they're actually going too fast because they're nervous, or too slow because they're nervous, or they're talking too quietly, we're nervous, we have signal. We say, oh, talk a little bit faster, slow down, volume up, volume down. So because it's in reality, it's different being in that room, and the impact is different. So I think having someone giving you some feedback it's not a bad idea.
That's awesome. I love that. Just to echo the point about taking a pause, like a couple seconds if you need it, I can say for myself that I used to get really nervous presenting in front of crowds. I still do, but like I used to get way more nervous, and I would get really bad dry mouth to the point where like I would actually choke because I couldn't talk because my mouth was so dry. And I have like one recorded presentation where that did happen, and I took a second or two, regathered myself, and started talking again. And looking back, you can't tell when that happened, except that I know, because I know when that happened. But it totally feels like an eternity when you take a second to regroup, but people don't really notice that much.
Yeah, these are all great. I think we're kind of approaching the end of our webinar. Remember that this is definitely a space for, when you go to a conference, it's a space for exchange of new ideas. It's an opportunity to network with people that maybe you wouldn't meet otherwise, because they're in different programs, they're in different parts of the country, of the world. So definitely see this as a great opportunity to not only showcase all of the hard work you put into your project, but also to learn about what other people are doing, get new ideas, meet new people. You get great kind of connections from this. Dr. Bradbeck, actually, I met during an ACS conference when I was a med student, and we sat at a table during a little like resident get together or something, and I was applying, and I think you were in the beginning of med school. No, the beginning of, you were applying to residency, I think, and you were a little bit closer than I was. So it's so funny to see how like we just meet over the years back, and a lot of the connections, a lot of the friendships I have are from the clinical congress. So definitely take that opportunity as a great opportunity to network and meet people as well. And I'll open now for any final pieces of advice, any other things you want to tell our attendees today, any other information they should know before going to the conference.
No, I think I think in the era of virtual meetings and virtual presentations and virtual recordings like today, I guess we can be sometimes really helpful. I think attending some of these meetings in person is a whole different experience. I hope you are able to come. I hope you come. I hope you really enjoyed it. They can be really great motivating moments at these meetings and change sometimes your even career direction or research direction.
Totally agree.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Special thank you for our speakers today for coming and sharing your wisdom, your pieces of advice, your experience from presenting in the past, and for also now judging other people's presentations when you're at the Congress. If you are listening in and you're a med student, if you're not an ACS med student member, make sure you join. If you're not a RAS member and you're a resident or a fellow, make sure you join as well. Whenever you do join, there are so many benefits and so many things you can get out of being a member of the college, so definitely don't miss out on those. And if you know of any colleagues or anyone in your class or friends that are not members, make sure you tell them about that as well. And one of the benefits is being able to listen to these kind of webinars and presentations that we put together. So make sure you become a part of the House of Surgery family, because we will love to have you be a part of it. So thank you both Dr. Bradbeck and Dr. Tavakoli for your time.
Thank you.
Be here. Thanks for having us.